Mm. My husband drove to his office every Saturday morning for 26 years. Even after he retired, Martin would pour his coffee into the travel mug I bought him at a church sale, the blue one with the chipped handle he refused to throw away, kiss me on the cheek, and say the same thing every single time. "Just checking on a few things, Carol. Won't be long." He was always back by noon, sometimes earlier. I never once thought to ask what things needed checking on a Saturday morning in a retirement office that had been closed for 4 years. I trusted him because that's what you do after 38 years. After 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and a mortgage paid off and a life built from nothing but hard work and the kind of ordinary love that doesn't make for good stories but makes for a good life. At least, that's what I believed it was. Martin died on a Wednesday in March. He'd been complaining of indigestion for a week, which is what men of a certain generation call a heart attack, until it isn't indigestion anymore. Ryan drove him to the emergency room while I waited at home, standing in the kitchen with my coat on, car keys in my hand, telling myself the whole time that it was nothing, that Martin was too stubborn to die. He wasn't. He was gone by 9:15 in the evening. The doctor was kind and spoke in careful sentences, and I remember nodding along as if she were describing something happening to someone else, in another town, in another life. The days that followed were soft around the edges in the way grief makes everything soft. People came with food. Ryan handled the arrangements. Our daughter Jessica flew in from Denver and sat on the couch with red eyes and wouldn't stop touching Martin's cardigan that I'd left folded over the armchair. I kept moving because moving was the only thing that felt like something. 2 weeks after the funeral, a certified letter arrived. The envelope was thick and official, stamped in red across the front. I almost didn't open it. I've been drowning in paperwork, death certificates and bank notifications and insurance forms, and one more official envelope felt like cruelty. But I opened it, standing at the kitchen counter in my bathrobe, and I read the first line 3 times before the words made sense. Dear Mrs. Carol Mitchell, co-owner, Mitchell & Associates LLC. Please be advised that your account with Hargrove Commercial Lending is now 214 days past due. The outstanding balance of $83,400 has been referred to our collections department. As a co-signer on the original loan agreement dated March 2019, you were jointly and severally liable for the full amount. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not gracefully. I just folded. I had never heard of Mitchell & Associates LLC. I had never co-signed a loan for $83,400. I had never heard of Hargrove Commercial Lending. But there was my name, my address, and what I would later confirm was a very convincing copy of my signature on a loan document I had never seen in my life. Ryan came over that evening. I showed him the letter without saying anything, just set it on the table in front of him and watched his face. He read it slowly, then read it again. Then he looked up at me with his father's eyes and said, very quietly, "Mom, I need to look at Dad's office." Martin's study had always been his private space. Not in an ominous way, just in the way that some people have a room that belongs to them. A place to think and organize and be alone with their thoughts. I had my garden. He had his study. That felt like respect, not secrecy. I understood the difference now, or I thought I did. Ryan went through the files while I sat in the armchair in the corner and watched. He was methodical, like his father, pulling folders and setting them in careful stacks. An hour passed, then another. The stacks grew. His face got very still, which is the way Ryan has looked since he was 9 years old, when something is wrong and he's trying to figure out how wrong. "Mom." He set down a folder, and his voice was the same flat, careful voice he'd used when he called me from the hospital. "How much did you know about Dad's business dealings?" "He was a financial planner," I said. "He retired 4 years ago. Did you know he had an LLC? I just found out 30 minutes before you walked in." Ryan spread 6 folders across the desk. He walked me through them the way you walk someone through a scene of an accident, slowly, letting them take each thing in before moving to the next. Mitchell & Associates, LLC, registered in 2009, a business I had apparently co-owned for 15 years without my knowledge. 3 separate commercial loans taken out in the company's name, all bearing my forged signature. A reverse mortgage on our house that had been executed 4 years earlier, $190,000, structured so that the full balance would come due upon Martin's death or the sale of the property. A withdrawal history from our joint retirement account spanning 8 years, $380,000 removed in careful increments, never enough at once to trigger an automatic alert. Never enough to make me look twice at the quarterly statements Martin always summarized for me before I could read them myself. What was left in our retirement account was $4,211. What was left in our joint checking account was $317. The room was very quiet. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked twice and stopped. "How?" was all I could say. Ryan closed the last folder. He was good at this, Mom. He was a financial planner for 30 years. He knew exactly how to move money without it looking wrong. He knew what people look for and how to avoid it. But why? Ryan was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. I found out the next morning when Ryan found the spare key taped to the underside of the center desk drawer and opened the locked bottom cabinet. Inside was a single envelope with my name on the front, in Martin's handwriting. Just Carol. Not my darling or my love, just my name, plain as a bill. I read it alone in the kitchen while Ryan made coffee he didn't drink. Carol, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you found what I should have told you years ago. I don't know how to explain it, except to say that I was afraid, and that fear makes cowards of better men than me. In 2009, I made an investment in a business venture I was certain would work. It didn't. Instead of telling you, I tried to fix it. I borrowed against the business, then against the house, then against our retirement. Every Saturday when I told you I was checking on things, I was meeting with creditors and lawyers and anyone who might help me find a way out. There wasn't one. I dug the hole deeper every time I tried to climb out. The LLC is in both our names because I needed a co-owner to access certain loans. I used your signature. I know what that means. I know what it makes me. I thought I could resolve it before it ever touched you. I was wrong. I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know it isn't. But it's all I have left to give you. I love you. That part was never a lie. Martin. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and held it in both hands for a long time. The coffee Ryan had made was getting cold on the counter. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window, the same way it had come through every morning for 31 years. Everything looked exactly the same. Nothing was. When Jessica called that evening, I told her everything. I read her the letter over the phone. When I finished, the silence on her end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom," she finally said, "are you sure you're reading that right? I'm reading it exactly as he wrote it." "But Dad wouldn't." She stopped. Started again. He couldn't. He was the most careful person I've ever known. He taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12. He was the one who always said, never sign anything you don't understand. He couldn't have done this. He did, Jess. Another silence. Maybe there's a mistake. Maybe someone stole his identity too, and he was trying to fix it. Maybe the letter is explaining that, and you're just hearing it wrong because you are grieving. I didn't argue with her. I recognized the need she had. The need for the story to be different, for the father who taught her to balance a checkbook to be the only version of her father that existed. I had felt something like it myself for about 45 minutes before I stopped. "I have the documents," I said. "When you're ready to look at them, I'll be here." She hung up shortly after. Ryan called me an hour later to say Jess had phoned him crying, insisting I was confused, that grief was distorting things, that I needed to talk to someone. He spoke carefully, the way he always does. "Give her time, Mom. She loved him a lot." "I know," I said. So did I. The lawyer's name was Susan Park. A friend of Ryan's from his accounting firm had recommended her specifically for cases involving spousal financial fraud. And she had the quiet, measured manner of someone who has heard many terrible things and chosen to make them her profession anyway. She listened to everything without interrupting. The LLC, The loans, the reverse mortgage, the retirement withdrawals, the forged signatures. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. Mrs. Mitchell, what your husband did constitutes financial fraud, identity theft, and forgery. These aren't terms I'm using loosely. Legally, those are the accurate descriptions. He's dead, I said. What does that mean for me? It means we can't prosecute him, but we can fight the debt. The forged signatures on the business loans can be challenged. If we can demonstrate a pattern of fraud, which the evidence seems to support clearly, we have grounds to argue you are not liable for loans you didn't knowingly authorize. She paused. The reverse mortgage is more complicated. That's a lien against your property. We'll need to challenge the validity of your consent, argue you didn't receive proper independent counseling as required by law. It's possible, but it will take time. How much time? 6 months to a year. And I won't mislead you. It will require money you may not have right now. I thought about the $317 in the checking account. I thought about the retirement fund that should have carried me through 20 years comfortably. I thought about 38 years of don't worry about the boring money stuff, Carol. I've got it handled. Tell me what to do, I said. The process that followed was the hardest work of my life. And I said that as a woman who raised 2 children, cared for a dying mother, and kept a household running on a teacher's salary for years before Martin's practice took off. Susan filed reports with all 3 credit bureaus. She contacted each of the business creditors with documentation of the forged signatures. She brought in a forensic handwriting analyst who confirmed in 14 pages of detailed documentation that the signatures on the loan applications were not mine. The reverse mortgage company received a formal letter of dispute. Ryan took a week off work to help me organize files. He built a spreadsheet. He attended every meeting. One evening, going through the 3rd box of Martin's papers, he found something that made him stop. Mom, he turned a document toward me across the table. Did you know Dad approached me about investing in his business? I felt something cold move through me. When? 3 years ago. He said he'd found a commercial real estate opportunity, that the return would be significant, that he wanted to bring family in on the ground floor. He set the paper down. I had $40,000 saved. Amy and I were going to use it for a down payment on the bigger house. Dad said to put it in. My voice came out very careful. Did you? Amy wouldn't let me. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. She said if it was such a sure thing, why did he need our $40,000? She said something felt off. I was furious at her. I thought she was being paranoid, that she didn't trust Dad. But you didn't invest. No. He looked at the table. I think he was already in trouble then. I think he was trying to use our money to buy himself more time. His voice got quiet. If Amy hadn't held firm, we'd have lost everything too. I reached over and took his hand. Amy was right, and you were smart enough to listen to her. I squeezed once. That's what matters. I needed income. At 63, with a resume that listed 20 years as a school librarian before I cut back to part-time and then retired to help care for Martin's mother, I was not exactly the market's most sought-after candidate. I applied to 6 places in the first 2 weeks. A grocery store, 2 coffee shops, the local library, which wasn't hiring, and a small flower and garden shop on the edge of downtown called Rest in Blooms that had a handwritten index card in the window, help wanted, part-time, must love plants or be willing to learn. I had a garden. I was willing. The owner's name was Peggy. She was 68 with short gray hair and reading glasses that she wore on a beaded chain around her neck and pushed up onto her head whenever she was thinking hard. She looked at my sparse resume for a long time. You were a librarian. For 20 years, yes. And now you need a job at a flower shop. I could have given her a soft answer. Instead, I gave her the true one because I was exhausted by soft answers. My husband died 6 weeks ago. He left me with a great deal of debt I didn't know existed. I need to rebuild, and I need somewhere to go during the day that isn't my kitchen. Peggy set the resume down. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. Then she said, I pay $14 an hour. I need someone Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Can you start next week? Working at Rest and Blooms turned out to be the first thing in a year that felt like forward motion rather than treading water. There is something stabilizing about handling living things, about cutting stems at the right angle and changing water in buckets and helping someone find the right arrangement for a difficult occasion. I was good at the helping someone part. 38 years of marriage and 20 years behind a library reference desk had made me patient and attentive. 2 things. Flowers reward. Peggy and I became friends the way you do when you work quietly alongside someone long enough that the silence becomes comfortable, and then the silence starts to fill with real things. She told me about her divorce, 25 years back, from a man who wasn't dishonest about money, just about everything else. Other women, other lives, she said one afternoon, repotting a peace lily with the focused precision she brought to everything. When I finally left, people told me I was overreacting. That marriage is hard and you work through it. She looked up at me. The people who say that are always the ones who've never had to. I understood exactly what she meant. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost 4 months after Martin died, when Jessica called me at the shop. I stepped outside to take it, standing in the small alley between the shop and the building next door, the air smelling of damp soil and the hyacinths we'd just received. Mom? Her voice was different. The hardness that had been in it every time we'd spoken in the last 4 months was gone. What was underneath it sounded very young. I need to tell you something. Okay, I flew into Dad's old financial planner. He used someone else to manage certain things. Did you know that? A guy in Reston. I went to see him because I wanted to prove you were wrong. She stopped. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just needed someone to tell me you'd made a mistake. I know, Jess. He showed me Dad's files. Not everything. He said he couldn't legally, but enough. A breath. Mom, there's a business loan from 2021, $47,000. The co-signer is listed as Jessica M. Crawford. My maiden name, her legal name. I never signed it. I've never heard of this lender. I didn't even know this business existed. Her voice broke at the edges. My credit score dropped 40 points last month, and I thought it was a reporting error. It wasn't. Oh, Martin. Even the letter he left hadn't told all of it. Maybe he hadn't remembered every thread he'd pulled loose. Maybe some things are too much to confess even in the final act of confessing. Jessica, I said, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. She was crying now, openly. I needed him to be just my dad, the one who helped me with math homework and walked me down the aisle. I couldn't fit both versions of him in my head at the same time, and it was easier to decide you were wrong than to accept that he was. Both versions were real, I said. The father who walked you down the aisle and the man who made these choices. They were the same person. People aren't only one thing. A long quiet on the line. Can I come home? Of course, come whenever you want. That Saturday, Jessica sat at my kitchen table and Ryan sat across from her and I made tea and we talked. Not around it, not softly, really talked about Martin, about the choices he made and the fear that probably drove them and the damage that rippled outward from a single bad decision he was too ashamed to name for 26 Saturday mornings a year for the rest of his life. About love and betrayal and the strange, exhausting fact that both things can live in the same person without either canceling the other out. Susan Park helped Jessica file the same fraud claims I had. The forged signature on Jessica's loan was confirmed by the same handwriting analyst. The creditor, faced with clear evidence, removed the debt from her record within 60 days. 4 months after I started working for Peggy, the court date arrived for the reverse mortgage dispute. A November morning, cold and flat. The kind of gray sky that doesn't commit to rain, but doesn't let the light through either. Ryan drove me. Jessica met us on the courthouse steps. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Cardwell, with close cropped hair and the unhurried manner of someone who does not need to perform authority because she simply has it. She listened to both sides. The lender's attorney argued that I had signed documents, that I had lived in the home and therefore benefited from the equity accessed, that my husband's death did not nullify a legitimate financial instrument. Susan stood and presented the evidence methodically. The way she did everything. The pattern of forged signatures documented across 4 separate loan instruments. The expert testimony confirming my signature had been replicated rather than original. The absence of the independent counseling session required by federal law before a reverse mortgage can be executed. The financial history showing all funds had moved into accounts in Martin's name alone. Accounts I had not known existed, spent on ventures I had not known existed. Then she called me. Mrs. Mitchell, Susan said, when did you first become aware that a reverse mortgage had been taken out on your home? When I read the letter from the lender, I said. 3 weeks after my husband died. In 38 years of marriage, did your husband ever discuss reverse mortgage products with you? He did not. Did you receive any of the funds from this mortgage? No. The money went into an account I didn't know existed, which was used for business investments I didn't know existed. Did you sign the mortgage application? I did not. The lender's attorney stood. He was young and careful, with the rehearsed confidence of someone who has won by attrition more often than by argument. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you relied entirely on your husband to manage your household finances? Yes. So by your own admission, you made a choice not to be involved in financial decisions? I looked at him steadily. I trusted my husband. I didn't choose to be defrauded. Those are not the same thing. You lived in the home for 31 years. You benefited from the marriage. I lived in my home, yes. The one my husband and I purchased together. The one he encumbered without my knowledge or consent. I kept my voice even. I understand the argument you're making, but trusting someone is not the same as authorizing them to commit fraud in your name. If it were, fraud wouldn't exist. He tried 2 more angles. I answered both the same way, calmly, with the specific facts. I had learned something in 4 months of meetings with lawyers and credit bureaus and handwriting analysts, that precision is a form of protection, that the specific, documented truth is harder to argue with than the vague, frightened kind. Judge Cardwell called a recess. We sat in the hallway for 40 minutes. Jessica held my hand. Ryan paced. Susan checked her notes. When we were called back, the judge looked at both tables for a moment before she spoke. The evidence in this case presents a clear and well-documented pattern of fraudulent activity conducted without the plaintiff's knowledge or consent. Federal reverse mortgage regulations exist specifically to protect both parties in a transaction and require independent verification of informed consent. That requirement was not met. The signatures on the mortgage application have been confirmed as forgeries by expert testimony. I cannot find grounds to hold Mrs. Mitchell liable for a debt created through fraud against her. The lien against the property is hereby released. Ryan made a sound. Jessica squeezed my hand so hard my rings pressed into my fingers. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, the one that had been there since March. We won. Walking out of the courthouse into the flat November air, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel at the end of a very long illness, when you're finally well enough to sit up in bed. Not good yet, but at least moving in the right direction. I had my house. I had my name. I had lost a marriage I thought I'd understood, a future I planned, a version of the last 38 years that I would now never be able to fully trust. But I was still there. That was something. The support group started quietly, the way most things start that matter. Peggy mentioned to a regular customer that I had experience with financial abuse in marriage, that I might be willing to talk. The customer brought a friend the following week. The friend told someone at her church. By February, we had 8 women sitting in the back room of Rest in Blooms on the last Wednesday of the month, surrounded by the smell of eucalyptus and fresh soil, with coffee and folding chairs and the mutual recognition of people who have been through the same kind of specific and visible wreckage. Their stories were different from mine in the details and identical in the shape. Control dressed up as care, secrecy reframed as protection. The partner who said, "I'll handle it," and what they meant was, "I'll handle it where you can't see." Some of them were still in their marriages. Some of them were just leaving. Some, like me, were on the other side of it, still finding their footing. I told my story at the first meeting. All of it. The Saturday mornings, the certified letter, the $317 in the checking account, the reverse mortgage, Martin's letter, Jessica not believing me at first, and then calling from the courthouse steps, crying. Someone asked how I had stayed calm through the legal process. I told the truth. I wasn't calm. I was terrified. I cried in my car in the Rest and Bloom's parking lot more times than I want to admit. I was furious in ways I didn't know how to express. But I kept moving forward because the alternative was staying still, and I'd spent too many years letting someone else decide where I stood. A woman in her late 40s named Denise came 3 months after the group started, brought by a friend who had been coming since the beginning. She was quiet for the first 2 meetings. At the third, she stayed after everyone left and asked if she could talk. Her husband was alive. They'd been married 19 years. She wasn't sure if anything was wrong. It was just that he managed everything, had always managed everything. Recently she tried to log into their joint account online and realized she didn't know the password. When she asked him for it, he said he'd changed it because someone had tried to access their account fraudulently, and he was protecting them. He'd been very reassuring, very calm. Something about the calmness bothered her. Trust that feeling, I said. Ask to see the statements. Tell him you want to sit down together and go through the accounts, not because you don't trust him, but because you want to understand your own finances. If that request makes him angry or evasive, that tells you something. She nodded, tears slipping down her face. What if I'm overreacting? What if I make things awkward for nothing? Then you feel a little foolish for an afternoon and you move on, I said. But if you're not overreacting and you don't ask, you could lose years. Don't let anyone tell you that love means not looking. She came back the next month. She'd looked. Her husband had been moving money from their joint savings into a private account for 3 years, $200 a week, building what he described when she confronted him as an emergency fund for himself in case things didn't work out. She'd filed for divorce 6 days before she walked back into that meeting. I'm terrified, she said, but I can also breathe for the first time in years. I knew exactly what she meant. The group grew. 15 women, then 20. We shared resources, documented which local lawyers handled these cases well, built a simple reference list of questions every married woman should be able to answer about her own finances. I typed it up and laminated copies, and we handed them out like a small, practical piece of armor. What accounts exist in your name? Do you have independent access? What is your credit score? When did you last see the full picture of your household debt? Peggy watched it all unfold from the front of the shop and occasionally appeared in the doorway during meetings to refill the coffee without being asked. One evening after a meeting, she sat down across from me in the empty circle of chairs. You know what you've built here, right? A support group, I said. More than that. She folded her hands in her lap. Martin tried to leave you with nothing. He tried to erase you financially, practically, from your own life. And instead of being erased, you spent the last year helping 20 other women not have the same thing happen to them. She looked at me steadily. That's not just survival. That's something else entirely. I thought about what she said for a long time on the drive home. On the last day of March, what would have been our 39th wedding anniversary, I drove to Meridian Community Bank. Not the branch Martin had used. A different branch across town, one he'd never had a reason to walk into. The teller was a young woman, probably 25, with efficient hands and a pleasant manner. I'd like to open an account, I said. In my name only. She pulled up the form. Of course. Can I get your full legal name? Carol Ann Reeves, I said. My maiden name. The name I'd had before Martin, before 38 years, before the Saturday mornings and the certified letters and the $317 and the gradual, careful dismantling of everything we were supposed to have built together. The teller typed it in without a second glance. Perfect, Ms. Reeves. And what would you like to use as your initial deposit? I deposited my paycheck from Rest and Bloom's. It wasn't a large amount. Peggy paid fairly for the work, but it was a small shop and the hours were modest, and I had no illusions about what it represented in the larger arithmetic of what I had lost. But it was mine in a way nothing had been mine in a very long time. Earned with my own hands, deposited under my own name in an account that no one else had the password to. The teller printed my receipt and slid it across the counter. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said. "I think I have what I came for." I drove back to the shop. Peggy was helping a customer pick between two arrangements of tulips, the yellow ones versus the peach, gesturing with the easy authority of someone who has spent a lifetime with flowers. She looked up when I came in and gave me a small nod, the kind that doesn't need words. I put my apron on and got to work. If you're reading this, if any part of this sounds familiar, the locked doors and the reassurances and that low, persistent feeling that something doesn't add up but you can't quite name it, I want to tell you what no one told me for 38 years. You are allowed to ask questions about your own life. You are allowed to see your own accounts. You are allowed to know the number in the bank that your name is attached to. Trusting someone should never require not looking. Real partnership doesn't need secrecy to survive. And if you've already looked, if you've already found what you were afraid to find, if your world has already come apart at the seam you didn't even know was there, then hear this. You are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. I lost a marriage I thought was one thing and turned out to be another. I lost a retirement I'd earned, and a future I planned, and a version of the man I loved that I now have to hold alongside the version I didn't know existed. I lost a year of my life to paperwork and courtrooms, and the particular exhaustion of fighting for things that should have been mine to begin with. But I kept the house. I kept my name, the one I chose to reclaim. I kept my son and my daughter, who sat with me in the hard part and came through it with me. I kept Peggy and the shop and the 23 women who meet in the back room on the last Wednesday of every month. I kept moving. That turned out to be enough to start with.